This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Hello! Today on the show, I chatted with designer, consultant, and editor Tracy Barnett. We sat down on May 19th, and we talked about their journey becoming a full-time freelancer, self-promotion and marketing, touched on a little bit about gatekeeping in RPGs, learning how to create graphics and layout, and of course their game, You Are the Dungeon, a single-player journaling experience that puts you in the role of a living sentient dungeon, which, as of this episode's air date, has 6 days left on its Kickstarter. Hi Tracy, and welcome on to Tabletop Babble. If you would, for my listeners, could you please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and what you do in the TTRPG space?
Sure. My name is Tracy Barnett. My pronouns are they and them. And I am a tabletop game designer, a game editor, a game layout artist and graphic designer-ish, a podcaster, and a general admin worker. We're at like 2.5 weeks of me working full-time freelance for myself.
I saw that. I this just happened. When did this? You've been working towards being full-time freelance for a while.
Yeah, I've been designing games, and so I've been designing games for almost 10 years now, and I've been doing audio work for the last 4 or 5 years, and have picked up the other skills along the way. So doing this has been the thing that I've wanted to do. And I know the people listening cannot see this, but if you look just over my left shoulder there, you'll see a crib. My partner is expecting. We're about 5.5 weeks out from the due date. And when we found out, because it wasn't planned, it made perfect sense for me to move to working from home so I could also be the stay-at-home parent and figure out how to do all this stuff with a baby around. So, yeah.
Yeah, that actually is kind of almost serendipitous. Mm-hmm. Like, that makes sense. But I'm interested, I personally am trying to break into the freelance world myself a little bit. And if you wouldn't mind sharing, like, what was your thought, like, personally, what were you thinking? How do I get here? Like, was there certain milestones you were looking for? Like, what was your approach to getting to that point?
So basically, with all of the things that I have that I would now say are marketable skills, they all started with me doing them because I wanted to, right? So with podcast editing, for example, because I'm doing audio work now for the One Shot Podcast Network, and you and I were talking before we started recording. I've got another freelance contract. I actually have a test file to give to a third one. But basically, I started doing my own actual play podcast, and I was listening to the other podcasts that I loved, and I did the thing that I try to do, which is listen to how they did what they did. And the one in particular is the Neoscum podcast, which is also on the One Shot Network. And at the time they were starting out, the editor, Casey Toney, was very open about his editing process. In fact, there was a podcast he was on where he really broke down how he set up an episode. And so I've listened to the Neoscum podcast all the way through, I think, a dozen times at this point in time, because I'm a super fan. And every time I listen to it, I listen for the edit stuff, right? To figure out how to put that stuff together. So I've been doing this work for a little while, and last August, actually almost a year ago now, I had an interview with James D'Amato at One Shot to do the stuff that I'm doing now. Like we talked about them needing an admin person, someone who could take, piecemeal work off of James's hands. And the time wasn't right yet. The pandemic actually factored into me getting this contract because they don't have their recording studio in Chicago any longer. And last August, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I know you do podcasting. Do you want to edit this episode of One Shot for me?" It was just out of the blue, just an episode to edit. And I did. And then when I was done with that edit, James sent me another file. And then when I was done with that one, he sent me another file. And after the third one, I said, "Hey, is this something that I'm just doing for you now?" And he was like, "Oh, yes." because he has ADHD. That's why he wants an admin person, right? It takes a lot to do all this stuff he's been doing. And so he's like, yes, I meant to tell you, I want you to be the editor for One Shot. So,
yeah. 10 episodes in, I'm editing a podcast now. When did this happen?
Yeah, so I started with the AP for Visigoths versus Molgoths, and then by the time we got to Sleepaway, which was the first real big thing I did, it was the first fully produced one I did, meaning I layered in music and sound effects, and that's something that I could bring to the table that James couldn't do in his regular schedule. Like, he wanted to elevate what One Shot was. So I have just been doing that. And there are very few that I've done since that don't have music or sound effects of some kind. Some of them don't really require it. If it's like a literal, just a one shot of a quick, the game is designed to be one session, it's really hard to like establish a character theme and have that, that leitmotif come back in a later, episode or whatever. But the work that I'm doing, the test file for it, if I get that job, it'll be the first audio drama that I've done, soundscaping as the term is in the industry for. So I won't be really editing the dialogue, because it's scripted, right? So it's largely read to form. It'll need tweaked a little bit for timing and whatnot, but I'll be doing the background effects and the music and all the atmospheric stuff. And that came because the people from Rusty Quill Gaming, who do the Magnus Archives and a bunch of other audio stuff, they were on One Shot because MacGuffin and Company wrote a game for James's book. So I edited them. They listened to it. One of the people involved, Ben Meredith, said, hey, you did a really good job. So I DM'd him on Twitter and said, by the way, if there's anything else, if you need anything, just let me know. And so when this new audio drama that he's part of came up, he mentioned my name. Like, that's basically how all of this has worked, is that I've tried to build up my skills to the point that I'm happy with what I'm doing, right? That if I put out a podcast, I like the way it sounds. If I put out a game, I'm happy with the words and how it's laid out. And then I'll be watching Twitter and someone will say, hey, I've got a game coming out. I need an editor. Anyone available? And I just, like, the first time I went, I have an English degree. I write games. I can edit. I've done this before. And so I pitched myself and they were like, yeah, cool. And so I gave my rates and that was it. Like, I got that job, and then that's a resume point, right? I can say that I edited Turn, which by Bo Yeager. That was my first professional editing job. And then I did developmental editing on Descent into Midnight, which is the high level, this section needs to go here, this section needs to go here kind of stuff. And then I am still in the middle of editing for Velvet Generation. And yeah, I just keep stringing things together because I keep putting myself out there and taking work as I'm able to. So the One Shot thing is now like an ongoing contract, and that's like a stable base of income. Like, I have a set monthly amount that I get from them that lets me do everything else, because I am assured that a good chunk of what I need to live and hold up my end of the bargain as a partner is taken care of. So I'm intensely lucky because I have had the space, to do things like launch You Are the Dungeon and commit the amount of time I've committed to promoting it and all that good stuff. Because right now on a Wednesday, I'd still be at work or coming off of a shift, and I wouldn't be in the headspace necessarily to even do this. Well, I would have had to say, Amber, we need to do this later, right? Please.
Yeah. I mean, and same with me, was like when I jumped on, I was like, I'm in the process of shutting down work Amber Brain and turning on podcast Amber Brain. Mm-hmm. Because yeah, I think it's what I'm finding difficult is finding that balance of like when to choose the right jobs at the right time. That's freelance that help you make those connections. Mm-hmm. Like you said with James, and then be able to go on from there, and then, pick kind of pick and choose, but also like, I think that's been, and then not burning myself out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's extremely difficult. And I have a lot of privilege in this regard. Like, the job that I had prior to this is the best job I've ever had. And I was the beer buyer at a retail grocery store, locally owned. So it was like a family owned business. like a higher end kind of deal. And my job wasn't hard. Like I was on my feet for 8 hours a day. It got worse during the pandemic, obviously. Like it was stressful to be there where it hadn't been before. But I had the mental space when I was done with work. It never came home with me. Like, unless I had a really bad customer, right? I just was done. I left work and that was it. I could do stuff on my lunch breaks or whatever. So a lot of really privileged factors fed into all of that. I've also been doing game stuff for a long time. So I've worked hard to establish a name for myself as someone who is out and visible and doing things. So when I say, hey, I can do this, they don't go, who are you again? And that takes, it all jibes really well with who I am as a person, right? Like I'm just lucky that I like to talk about myself and I like to promote the things that I do. This is great. Like I'm going to leave this interview not tired because I like doing this kind of thing. There's a unique combination of factors, some of them which are just me being me, that are allowing me to do this, and everyone's path is going to be different.
Yeah, very true. And I'm trying to remember to stay focused on that. Like my journey is not going to be the exact same journey as somebody else, and I think people need to recognize that in themselves as well as they start to look out at the broader community and seeing people on different trajectories and stuff. Well, and my question is, since I mean, like you said, you've established yourself in the community, people know who you are. Like even when I first met you in person, I think, oh gosh, was it?
Catacon 2019.
At a con. Yeah, there it is. I already knew who you were because of, well, I knew you were a huge Neoscumper because you talk about it a lot. But it's like, yeah, I already knew who you were. I knew like Iron Edda. And so it was nice to meet you in person. But like from that point, I kind of just like osmosis you in. So I'm interested in knowing like, where did that start? Like we can go as far back as when did you start first playing TTRPGs, or when did you start like in the space, or both, because I'm open and you already said you like talking about yourself and I want to hear about yourself. So have at it, Tracy.
So the start of playing games is one of those very stereotypical Midwestern starts, right? And this was when I say when I was a kid and my cousins brought over D&D, I mean, it was 1988 and they brought the red box, right? And so I bought the red box and I bought the blue box and I had no idea how to play them and never actually did anything with D&D until I was in college. Some people that I worked with invited me to play in their group when D&D 3rd edition first launched, so that was 2000. And I played a lot of 3rd edition. I think there were 4 or 5 books that I never owned for 3 and 3.5. And there were a lot of books for that.
Yes, there were.
Yeah. And it was all stuff at the end of the life cycle of the system. I first ran a game with 4th edition, which was actually lovely. 4th edition taught you how to run a game really well. And I started designing games in 2012. I had been doing setting work for a while, just making my own campaign setting and posting about it on a blog I'd set up. And I had started discovering other systems beyond D&D stuff. I started going to conventions. I'd met some friends out in Kansas City who were running a convention, and I went to visit them over New Year's, and on the drive back, it's a 12-hour drive, I was bored, and I started just rhyming words in my head, and that turned into School Days, which was my first game. And at the time, Kickstarter was a relatively brand new thing. I think it had been around for a year, maybe. And I just looked around and said, okay, how do I do this, quote unquote, the right way? How do I make a game right? I was like, well, I need someone to do layout. So I pinged Daniel Salas because he'd been around. I'd seen him post layout stuff and he was available. I hit up Brian Patterson, D20 Monkey on Twitter. He did all the interior art and the logo, and Elizabeth Bauman did, actually that's not their last name any longer. I forget what their non-married name is. Anyway, it's been a while. They did the editing for it. Like there are people that I knew online, and I just said, hey, I'm doing this thing. I had gotten some boost in following on Twitter because January of 2012, I was at the convention where Wizards of the Coast announced D&D 5e for the first time and had panels and whatnot, and I was the only person live tweeting that panel. So I got like 100 followers in a weekend because I turned into a source about D&D information, and I rode that wave into the first Kickstarter. And I just kind of never stopped, other than some intensely depressive episodes where I was far too honest online. I tried to keep what I'm talking about positive in general. I'm not unwilling to call out people who are doing ridiculous stuff. Today has been a day for that. If you've seen the discourse around galloping through your feed, there's a lot of old white dudes who want to say a whole lot right now. So yeah.
I would like touch on that real quick because I don't know how chatty or quote I want to bring discourse into this podcast. Mm-hmm. Normally, like, I'm the kind of person who tries very hard to be pretty even keeled about things. I try to keep it positive. I try not to engage, but also sometimes I see stuff where I'm like, if it's not bothering you personally, mm-hmm. why even speak out about it? Like, if you're coming from a place of privilege and power and literally the complaints that you're seeing online have nothing to do with you, why even say anything?
Yeah, I think to sort of reveal the general sense of what we're talking about to the people who are listening, there's a lot of what I would call older guard RPG creators, right? People who came up in the mid 90s to early 2000s, a lot of whom did work for TSR and other bigger companies that were around, who have capital O opinions about how the landscape of RPGs is now, and who feel like they need to offer not their opinion, but the way things should be done. And I find that to be very, not just unhelpful, but harmful, because the landscape of the RPG industry during that time period was pretty toxic and outright abusive in some cases. And these are all people who, by dint of their assumed gender role in society, who have, in some cases, toxic masculinity seemingly baked into their bones, and who suffered during that time like they're just lashing out at things they don't understand because they're worried about being irrelevant. And the point, I wrote a thread on this on Twitter today because I felt it was necessary to get it out there. Like, there's room for literally everybody in games as long as you're not a hateful bigot. So if you're worried about your impending irrelevancy as someone who has been around the industry for a while and who has done things in very specific ways and sees the rise of itch.io and all of the independent publishers making lyric games that are poems in game form, if even that, like, who are generally redefining what games are, and it scares you, then my actual advice, this will sound flippant, but it's to go to therapy and figure yourself out and figure out how to not let your damage harm other people.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I don't know why I'm trying to like hold back some of my thoughts on these things sometimes. Again, I'm trying to be very like, is what I'm going to say actually truly helpful? Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. I think if you look at a group of people up and coming who are basically expanding out the people of interest in RPGs in general, to me, I see that as inviting. Like, mm-hmm. here are more... A lyric game appeals to somebody who may never think about, an OSR game, right? Mm-hmm. But over time, as they start getting more into RPGs, want to know the history, they start to see other things. Maybe they enjoy that kind of stuff. And then you potentially have another person who's interested in your work, if it is not built on really bad systemic bullshit that used to be is kind of still a very prevalent thing in bigger published games. But it's just kind of mind-boggling to me, but I don't have that brain, so.
Like I said, I think toxic masculinity is kind of the beating heart and soul of this problem, and it's a societal problem that we see a lot in this industry because it used to be very, very male dominated, and that is changing, not quickly. But I feel comfortable speaking out on these things because I have privilege. I'm a non-binary person, but you've met me in person. I look like a 6'5" dude, right? I have a beard. I present as, generally speaking, I think I don't know if I read queer to people or not. And it doesn't matter. I'm not concerned about that. Otherwise I would change how I look. But so I have a perceived shield in front of me, right? Like I have said all kinds of things on Twitter that speak out against established power structures and blah, blah, blah. And I don't get any flack for it. But someone like yourself, right? Or say Brandon Leon Gambetta, who, if he mentions D&D on his feed, it's just like, blah. I can literally copy his tweet word for word and just paste it as my own, and no one would peep about it. And it's not because I don't have an audience, right? Or that people don't look at the hashtags. It's because when you look at my profile, I'm white.
Yeah.
Yep. So I don't blame you for not saying things. You would invite heat if you brought things. Heat that you don't necessarily want in your particular kitchen. So
yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think that privilege needs to be used for is if I do have a shield, I need to use it to make spaces safer for other people.
Well, I appreciate that because it's like, this is a topic I try to stay very focused on the person I'm interviewing and their work that they're doing. But as time is going on, I've been having conversations off of recording that are really good that don't end up in the show because it's just this one-on-one, this is what's going on. I want to be able to do that more without feeling like, I don't know. I don't whining all the time, quote unquote. I know I'm not. It's just not. Sharing an experience that I have. And I've been having more and more guests on which we do get to talk about that. And it's exciting for me because it's stuff that I like, but whatever. I don't know where I'm going with this.
May I offer unsolicited advice? Is that okay in this moment?
It is solicited. I would like your advice.
Fantastic.
Yes,
I wanted to double check. I think if you just keep doing what you've done in this conversation here, you're going to find yourself in the position where you get to talk about those quote unquote real things more often, right? Because if you create a space, which with me at least, and granted we know each other outside of this podcast, you've created a space where I feel comfortable talking. So I'm just going to wear my agenda, if you will, on my sleeve. Everything that I do in this industry is tied to how I comport myself. If I did something heinous and awful, then I would suddenly not be working for One Shot. I would, all the work that I had won, no one would buy my games. So I think that even though I struggle with professional jealousy, I struggle with wanting to see myself succeed, perceiving that I should be succeeding where maybe I'm not, I have learned over time that taking the time to evaluate myself first and look at what I can change is way more productive in the long term than asking, well, where's my portion? Because that's a very privileged white dude thing to say. It's like, where's mine for the work that I barely did? It's very Tuxedo Mask, right? Well, my job here is done. You didn't.
Why did you do anything?
That's right. And I don't want to do that. I'm not some champion who's trying to fix things and save someone, right? I want to lift people up. Everyone, they've got their own voices. So my point is that if you keep making a safe space, then you'll get people's real experiences more often than not. And if those experiences, the things they do, the things they believe in are relevant to gaming, you're going to end up talking about them. And that's great.
It's true. It's one of those when, so I inherited this podcast from James Introcaso. And so, yeah, listeners, if you are still listening, you're still here. I'm sure I'm a very people-focused person, and I always would think about the people I bring on the show first and foremost, because that's just my focus. Games is kind of like just the cherry on top of me getting to know people. Like, you make games too? Great. Let's talk about your game, but also I want to know you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have been bringing on intentionally people that I think don't really get a lot of that attention, that platform to get to speak, or they're doing really cool things that really resonate with me and my experience. And that's what I've been trying to do, and that's what I want to continue to do. And I hope people are enjoying it. I hope people like it. So, like, leave a rating or review. Oh, this is a minute podcast call for that.
Hey, you listener, you're awesome. Go leave a rating or review, please. 5 stars.
5 stars. I'll read them. I'll read your 5-star reviews.
That's right.
But yeah, I think it's definitely, I'm conscious of it. I don't speak out about it a lot because I'm just trying to lead with my action, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I just don't feel eloquent enough to speak on stuff as I'm getting new into this space. But
that's totally fair. Well, if I can take a moment to brag on you, you do great work.
Oh, thank you.
Muritama is fantastic. I am anxiously awaiting the shipment of my land pins. I haven't played Magic actively in probably 20 years, and I bought the full set because I want them on my backpack. So a lot of people, I think, when they're looking down the road of wanting to be a freelancer, they wonder, is the work that I'm doing good enough, right? And I think for more people than not, if you're asking that question of yourself on a regular basis, if you're like, is this good enough? Do I need to do better? The answer is you're good. You're definitely good enough for someone. You're good enough to build an audience. You're good enough to put your work out there, because if you keep doing things, you're always going to get better at doing things.
Right.
Or you're going to find that you've reached the end of your capabilities and you need to pivot to something else. So for you, Amber, you are a fantastic artist. Your goblins are delightful.
Aw, yeah,
and
thank you.
I think that should you be able to have the time and the energy to put towards the things that you love about what you make, that's where the source of success, barring a bunch of other external factors, privilege included, that's where that comes from. Because if you're making things that you dig, when you talk about them, you're going to be genuinely excited. And that excitement is contagious. That's the thing. Like when I sold beer, people would tell me, "Oh, you're such a good salesman." Gender markers aside, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I guess I just like this beer.
I really love this beer. It's so good. And like, yeah, I'll buy it.
Yeah, and it's my job to sell things, right? It's my job to get excited about things, but that's how I sell stuff, is to get excited about it. And so that's baked into my personality. If that's not who any creator is as a person, I can understand it looks really intimidating to get out there and do a marketing and try and do whatever. But if you can be genuinely yourself and put a positive version of that out into the world with solid work, you're going to find people that like it. And you're going to find people that want to give you money for it. You have to just keep going.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think people, and I say people, I bucket myself in that people, is where when you have all those external factors, you're introverted, you have depression, you have ADHD, it becomes hard, it's exhausting to do stuff.
Yeah.
And then you also are like, well, I did X today, I have to keep doing X if I'm going to get anywhere. And sometimes that's even exhausting looking for it out. But like, even when you were saying, you started 10, 12-ish years ago getting into the spot, that is a decade plus of putting yourself out to the point now where you are able, again, with all the other factors involved, can do this full-time freelancing.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
It's a set of goals realized for me, right? Because after I saw Daniel Salas's work on School Days and I saw his other game design work, I went, okay, that's a really good skill set to have. And then I got introduced to John Harper, right? John Harper, if any of you don't know, he is the person who has published, well, Blades in the Dark is probably what he's best known for, but Aegon, and what I first knew him for was Lady Blackbird, which is a one, I think it was 1 or 2 page RPG. It's free, where it's just a game that he wrote and developed and laid out and did the art for himself. And I looked at that and I went, it's that. That's what I want to be able to do. Because when you're working in the industry and you have like a moral and ethical responsibility to pay people correctly for their labor, then you start looking at what that costs and you go, oh, I can't do that all the time, right? Like, it would be a treat to make a game that has your goblins in it. That'd be a delight. But I can't afford to pay you. I can barely afford to pay myself right now. So projects like that get put on the shelf of dreams, right? Maybe it's something that never happens. Maybe it's a motivator you can work toward. I have a little bit of background in visual art, meaning I tinkered around with Photoshop Essentials when we bought our first scanner when I was growing up. But like, I just started messing with this stuff and figured out that I can do it. I got a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud at some point in time. I think because I was doing, it must have been layout for games. I forget exactly why it was or how I justified it to myself. But it had Adobe Audition on it. So when I started doing podcast work, I was like, well, I have a pro audio tool right here. I don't like using Audacity. So I'm going to go and learn how to use this. And it worked. And I'm lucky that my mind gets those things. Like, I'm extremely lucky in that. But I'm now to the point where, at least with a small game, I can write it and revise it and lay it out and source some free art and tinker with it in Photoshop or Illustrator, and I can make a full game tip to toe. I did it. Like, I set a goal for myself and I figured out how to do it. And that's wild. It's amazing. I'm so lucky that I can do that. But just because you're the person I'm talking to, you can do that too. I know you have the capabilities to do that. It's a matter of whether you want to or have the time to, right? But you have, and you're way better at a lot of this stuff than I am. I just haven't stopped working and I haven't stopped promoting myself. So I'm getting success because of the mechanisms of capitalism and how I am as a person.
Sometimes, winning a game isn't about dealing the most damage, or drawing the most cards, or making any measurable contribution towards victory. But hey, just because you don't have the stats doesn't mean you're not a f***ing gamer god, alright? Enter The Intangibles, a podcast on the Geekspective Network, where me, Kenny, and my brother Matt break down all the things that are hard to quantify in games. All kinds of games. We're talking classics like Sonic's the Hedgehogs, and chess, and 3D Pinball Space Cadet. Great game, by the way. We're talking new releases like
insert latest trending games on Twitch here.
Single player, co-op, competitive, card games, board games, role-playing games, play-by-mail games, the Wakes. We do deep dives into our favorite games, digging into the intangibles that make them great and the intangibles that will make you a better player, and hey, maybe even a better person. Check out the intangibles on whatever the heck platform you're listening to right now.
You're a way better artist and designer than I am. You have actual training in that stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't. I go to Pixabay and I grab an image and I go, cool, how can I compress the levels on this so everything's super blocky and saturated, and then what 4 filters can I toss on top of that? Graphic design, baby.
You know what? I used to be a pretty snobby graphic designer. I'm gonna come clean. When I was going through my college, I was like, I have to do XYZ this way, and that's how you're old. I'm like, but now I'm like, nah, man. I have seen people who, like, you're claiming like, oh, you I don't have the skills. I'm like, but you are learning through osmosis and exposure to what what looks good when you see it, what appeals to you when you see it, and you're figuring it out with your tools. And sometimes I think some of the best designs come from limited, like you have a very limited scope of what you have available to you, and then you are forced to, like you said, compress something down and then add maybe 1 or 4 layers, but it's gonna come out. I don't know. I used to be that snob. Now I'm like, nah, anybody can be a graphic designer. You're putting something on there and it looks good and you've emulated a style that you wanted and it's attractive. Like I've looked at, talking about your game. Let's pivot to your game. You Are the Dungeon. One of the first things I saw about, You Are the Dungeon, I'm a visual person first. I see the artwork and I was like, I really like this very zine-like cool castle or whatever, or dungeon tower. And I'm like, that looks awesome.
It's a matter of learning stuff over time. And I really want to emphasize, like, there's a lesson that I learned early on. I think Fred Hicks of Evil Hat he said this multiple times, and I think it was in a conversation with him at a convention once. It takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And that is across the board. You have to put in work and time and effort, generally speaking, before people will notice you and be like, oh, wow, you're really popping off right now, aren't you? Okay, yeah, but if the stuff that I'm talking about so glibly and easily, because I'm going to rattle off some graphic design stuff, it's because I took a long time to figure this out, and I did not do as well at this stuff when I first started. So, like, what really got me to the graphic design for You Are the Dungeon is learning how to use Adobe Illustrator, because vectors are fantastic.
Yes, they are.
If you've ever worked, even Microsoft Word or whatever, right? You type something, you put an image in there, and you export it to a PDF, or you save it as a file, and you look at it on your phone later or something, and you're like, why are the edges on this so fuzzy? Well, it's because it's not a vector, baby. Vectors are clean at any resolution. And so on Pixabay, which is a free site, you can search by vectors. There's just vector art on there. And I found a tower, and I was like, that's a cool tower. Looks pretty nice. Doesn't quite look like a dungeon though. What should I do? So I took it, and the door was on like one side of it. So I took it and I flipped it on the vertical axis. So it was the same image laid over itself. So the door, see how it has that kind of line in the middle of the door? It's because it's two doorways. And then I was like, okay, that looks pretty cool. Like it looks kind of evil and grim now. But the one that I had like weird crenellations at the top and whatever. So it's like, okay, this vector looks neat. I can't really delete parts of the lines in Illustrator that easily. So I saved it as a transparent PNG and dropped it into Photoshop and just started cutting away parts of it. Like I took the crenellations off the top so it kind of has that jagged dome top. And if you look at like the markings inside the bricks, they're kind of mirrored, but not 100%, because I didn't want it to look like I just mirrored it. So I just took a few out on each side. So it looks a little bit more natural. And that's what that is. The font is just a font that I found. You know what?
A good font and a tweaked graphic, and you're doing good. It's like, listener, I don't know if I've talked about this, but yeah, I have been doing graphic design work every day for the last 13, 14 years. It is my primary income. I'm a manager of layout and graphics at a company. And I have a team of 3 people who work under me. And one of the things that I tell them all the time is like, I could show you exactly what you can do to make it easier. In some places I do, like when it makes sense to like show them like, this is how you use the tool. But when it comes to like you said, how you took the dungeon itself, and the tower, and you flipped it and you did this and this, and you knew to even like, I want to make it not look like it's completely, symmetrical. I want to add little details. That's all stuff that I want them to kind of figure out on their own, because once you figure that out on your own, you have that knowledge now and it's more ingrained in you so that you can continue to build on it further and further. And so I think that's fantastic. It looks great. I mean, I wouldn't have, until you said that you took it and flipped it, I wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah. And again, I will phrase it in that I got lucky that it worked that way, because I tried a lot of other tower type setups or castles or whatever, and I couldn't make them look like black metal grim enough. Like, it just wasn't working out. And one of the ways that I found to do that sort of thing is to double something up. In Photoshop, one of my favorite tricks is to take something that looks a certain way, and you're like, well, I want it to look a little bit more like whatever. So you duplicate the layer, and you adjust the colors, or you put a filter over it, and then you change the layer effect. So, like, different things are showing through, and if you just start messing with that, like, a lot of stuff just looks really nice because other bits are popping through it, and you can, I don't know, it's a fun and it's like, it's part of the fun, like you said, like having fun, you want to do it, and then you get something that looks good. It's just fantastic. So here's a couple of, if you wouldn't mind, here's some unsolicited advice, if you would like it. Mm-hmm. A resource that I don't know if you know exists is called Creative Market. Have you heard of this website? I'm not familiar, no. Okay, creativemarket.com, and this is for listeners too, if you're doing your own graphic design stuff. They have, every Monday, they release free assets that are just completely, you can download. Like, if you sign up for their newsletter, they send out free graphics every Monday. Usually it's like a couple of fonts, maybe some things. But they are a resource of just tons of fonts, tons of vector graphics, Photoshop layers, templates out the butt. Like, there's so much stuff on there. And if you are, and like anything ranging from like $3 to, $150 for a full suite of fonts, whatever you want. But if you are looking for more assets, that is a place I would highly suggest. And then also another thing, one of the best advice I got in my college career going through graphic design was from this professor I really, really loved. He was amazing. He said, in graphic design, there's a lot that is just completely inspired off of each other, and nothing will ever be 100% unique. Very rarely does that happen. That is something is completely like a style just emerges, right? That is unique of its own. And a lot of it's just designers being inspired by each other. So he was like, if you want to get better at your graphic design, like mentally and aesthetically, just always be looking at. And so I build Pinterest boards. Constantly build Pinterest boards to draw from, and that's my other way that'll instantly like just be critical of other people's graphic design in the sense of, what do I like about this? Why is this appealing? Oh, I see what they did there. And so that's for you and for listeners if they're interested. That's great. I'll also say that I bought a really good bundle from Design Cuts. They do sales of font packages and vector bundles and all kinds of like brushes and whatnot. So I got a lot of stuff from that. And I'll also say, in reference to your statement that artists are inspired by each other, I think that everything that you create, whether it's graphic design or games or whatever, it's always in conversation with something. Your inspiration for it came from a certain place, and you are making a certain thing that is not exactly what you were inspired by, but those influences are there. It may just be a previous thing that you've done, right? You might be in conversation with yourself. A lot of my game ideas come from playing video games, and so I'm in conversation with those games. I want to take one certain part or a feeling that I got while I was playing the game and find a way to replicate that on tabletop. Or I see someone's game mechanics and I'm like, I think I could do this with that, right? And my game is now in conversation with those mechanics. For example, one of my favorite games to hack is Honey Heist by Grant Howitt, where you are bears in hats, because bears in hats are always not viewed as bears, who are a group of bears on a heist mission at HoneyCon. And you have two stats. You have crime and bear. And you want to roll you get a certain number of dice. It's a hack of lasers and feelings. Regardless, it's a wonderful premise. It's free. Go read it. But like the game that I just finished is called Muscle Wizard Gets the Job Done, where You can play by yourself, or you can play with a group of as many people as you want to, and you all play the muscle wizard. And you have 2 stats, muscle and wizard. And when you roll a d8, and when you're trying to do something wizardy, you want to roll higher. When you're trying to do something muscly, you want to roll lower. And there's a table of 100 random events. Muscle wizard wakes up in the morning. You describe how your muscle wizard goes about the day. There's also a name table where you roll 3 d20s and you get 3 name pieces that you have to jam together, and then you put and then a d20 to give you great or powerful or outstanding, so you have your wizard name. And then when the muscle wizard is ready to, you roll on the 100 table to figure out what problem muscle wizard has to solve, and you just all work together to sort of tell the story. And at the end of it, when your tracker either gets to full muscle or full wizard, that's how you finally attempt to solve the problem. You do that. You describe what it's like to go full muscle or full wizard, and then you decide whether or not the problem was solved, and then you go to bed.
I love this.
And then you wake up the next day, and then the cover image for it is in the chat. I was dropping it in there when we were talking graphic design.
Woo! The 2 powerful flexing muscles. I love it. I think the interview that is coming out prior to I was speaking with Caro Assertion, and we're talking about we talked about Honey Heist as well. It's such a hackable, wonderful game. And I love when you have mashups of stuff that just don't get, like, Muscle Wizard just conjures a very specific image in my mind, and it delights me and tickles me, and I love it.
Good. It is probably going to be released by the time this episode airs, if the air date in our shared document is accurate. I think I'm going to put it out next week. So,
oh, nice. Yes, it should be.
It's all done. It's laid out. So
great. That's awesome. Well, you know what? We brushed over You Are the Dungeon. We've been talking about the graphic design of You Are the Dungeon, but I want to hear more about You Are the Dungeon because, one, it's a premise that excites me. So yeah, would you mind sharing a bit for the listeners?
Of course. You Are the Dungeon is a single player or group game where you literally are the dungeon. You are brooding, evil, and eternal. So you start off, it's all like sort of basically world building, but within the context of being a dungeon. So you describe the beginning of your origins, right? What you were originally, who created you, what evil took root in your heart, and what evil, awful thing first moved in after you became the dungeon. And then you draw some basic shapes on some grid paper that I provide, right? You don't make it too complicated because you're going to grow over time. Then the rest of the game is comprised of 2 seasons. Foray, where adventurers come into your depths and very few of them leave. And Fallow, where you grow in power and a new evil being moves in. So you draw tarot cards to figure out the dispositions of your adventurers, like you might have an excited merchant or a depressed farmer, right? And then you give them a name, and then you roll on some tables I provided to figure out what their fate in the dungeon was. Like maybe they encountered a platinum harp. And you're like, okay, well, it's that. But in your mind, you're like, well, this place is evil and awful. What else happened? And you can leave it just at platinum harp, or you can write a little sentence or a paragraph describing what actually occurred when they encountered it. And then you roll to figure out how many people make it out alive. And you decide who lives and who dies. Then you do your fallow session where you describe what bright, shiny thing the adventurers left, how you corrupted that thing, what new evil thing moved into the dungeon, what they added to you, and what price you extracted from them. And then you draw more on the map and make more dungeon, and then you do it again for as long as you want to.
Yeah, I love a lot of these games like this because it feels... I like environmentist storytelling. Mm-hmm. Like I love going into a game and like exploring an area and being like, what happened here? Mm-hmm. And like this kind of game is like that, except you are the dungeon and you get to kind of build that story and I also like it as a tool for like, this would be an excellent game for making a dungeon for a game or campaign. And
Yeah.
Oh, I love
so
this stuff.
guidance to do that is included in this new version.
Oh,
Because I first
cool.
wrote this back in November of 2020, and this is a new zine format version. So the Kickstarter you can back for a physical copy, which is a 16-page 8.5 by or 5.5 by 8.5 zine that I print and hand staple and all that good stuff. It's a really good game. It's one of those things that I wrote very quickly because I was really inspired. The genesis of this is actually the idea of the marketing funnel. Have you ever heard of the marketing funnel? So it's a not quite 101 principle in marketing, call it 102 maybe, where the idea is that there are 4 steps in the funnel, where the first is you want people to know about you, right? And then the second step, which is fewer people, you want them to engage with you, right? Or your product. The third step is that they buy a thing, and that's even fewer people, right? So the funnel's getting narrower. And then the last step is that people who have bought your thing are so excited about it that they go out and they tell more people, and the funnel starts over again. So Jeff Stormer and I go listen to the Party of One podcast if you don't already. Jeff Stormer's amazing. Had a meeting about marketing stuff, and he taught me about the funnel. And in order to understand it, I came up with an allegory for it, and it was being a dungeon, right? Evil, awful, on the hill, but think of it from a marketing perspective. Like, people hear about you, they're like, oh, we're going to do this. They're getting ginned up in the tavern, and then they go to the dungeon. Not all of them make it out alive, but those who do will not stop talking about what harrowing experience they had, and then a new round of adventurers, oh, I can do that, right? And so as I was writing a Twitter thread about all this, I realized it would make a really good game, and so I wrote a game a week later.
That's so fun. I love it, just like this idea. I have so I'm already being inspired by this game because in my mind I'm a contrarian. I'm like, why does every dungeon have to be evil? I want to make a happy dungeon, like a happy dungeon which is funny because anytime I play a game where I'm trying to turn the expectation of like suspicion because people have all these tropes built up about stuff, every time I present something as like innocent, no one believes me. And I'm like, no, this is just a happy town with happy motivations. There's nothing evil here. It's okay. So I wonder if people would even be okay with a happy dungeon.
Well, so I have a vague plan to write more games in this style as time goes on. I've already started, and it's proving to be a little more difficult, but I want to write You Are the Tavern, where you design a fantasy town based on the stories that are told in the kind of creepy tavern that's always at the middle of town. I want to write a location for good places, right, that are places of healing and peace and so on and so forth. And then I want to write one called You Are the Palace of Dreams, which you build out this massive, sprawling, beautiful palace based on the dreams of the people in the world who come to visit it, and you build a godly pantheon based on that. The evil gods put dungeons in the world. The good gods put springs or whatever they are in the world, and the neutral gods put taverns.
Yeah, I love it.
And then when you've played all of that, I've thought of You Are the Caravan for like traveling across the world, and You Are the Golden Throne for like an imperial city. But basically, you play through all of these and you've built a campaign setting.
Oh, I love it.
So I just have to figure out how to adapt these mechanics to the other stuff, because this came really quickly and really easily. The other things are proving to be a little bit more challenging to make them as engaging, because the tone of this game, how it's written, is very, like, if you've ever seen Dread Singles on Twitter at Hottest Singles, like hot singles in your area, mouths agape, tongues lolling into the dirt, right? It's all very overblown, and this game is written in the most, I used adjectives in ways they're not supposed to be used, like I just threw everything I had at it, and so it's really evocative because of that. Trying to write the other ones in a similarly evocative manner when a neutral tavern doesn't have nearly as many descriptors you can apply to it is more challenging. So,
yeah, I was gonna say maybe it's devoid of descriptors because it's neutral. It's just what it is. But yeah, I think you're gonna have such a. I'm excited to see it because this seems like a very specific, like you said, evoking a certain aesthetic. And to see it being done for the good would be like, immediately think of games like Ryutama, Wander Home, maybe like other Cozy Town,
Golden Sky Stories.
yeah, stuff like that, you're gonna have to try and like aesthetically build off of that. And then for neutral, yeah, like okay, nothing. There's no descriptors. They're very benign.
The details are smaller, right? The important things are closer to home and hearth, right? So it's the smell of baking bread and the chatter of warm conversation, right? It's those kinds of things, which is a very different tone to buy into than the evil brooding dungeon that lies over the hill, right? So it's no less compelling. You have to come at it from a very different direction.
And from like a marketing perspective, it's like you're kind of like almost appealing to different, like, because like for me, You Are the Dungeon appeals to, I used to play a lot of death trap dungeons when I first got started in RPG stuff. And then, but now I'm very drawn to cozy stuff. So it's like, I think, I don't know. I'm just excited. When I get excited, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I start going off, and I just want to say I love it all, and that's it. And I'm happy for you with You Are the Dungeon. Is this the first Kickstarter game you've ever done?
This is my 12th.
12th?
I also do Kickstarter consultation for other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're 12. Oh my gosh. I think that's been a conversation for another time. We're almost talked for an hour now, but
yeah. So wow. To put a button on You Are the Dungeon, I launched it about a week ago as of this recording. By the 31st, I have about a week left, I think, roughly speaking. It had a $3,000 goal. It is currently at $11,500. It is coming up on 400% funded, which is amazing. And I have a couple of stretch goals hanging out there at $18,000. Gannon Reedy, who is the game master of the Neoscum podcast and also an artist, is going to be doing a full tarot deck in his dark metal, brutal, scribbly kind of style that will be available digitally to all the backers at $18,000. And if by some stretch of the imagination it hits $30,000, there'll be a physical deck add-on that you'll be able to buy, because I'll get a full print run of decks done. That's
really cool. And I also have been seeing that you are streaming this as well, so people can see.
The streams right now, as of this exact moment, are wrapped up, but all the VODs are available. I've been doing them through the One Shot Network Twitch channel. So I've had on Jeff Stormer and Erica Tanasias from the All My Fantasy Children podcast. I had on Jordan Shively, aka Dread Sinkles. I had on 3/4 of the Broadswords podcast, because Kristen doesn't like to stream. I had on Michael Lenny and Gannon from Neoscum. I had on JV and Val from Paperboat Productions. And I had on the Double Clicks. So, yeah, all those videos are on the One Shot Podcast YouTube channel. If you just look up One Shot RPG on YouTube, you will find all of them. And I had a very good time playing We Are the Dungeon with all of those stellar people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to have you back on because we have talked quite a bit about a lot of stuff, and this was a very good getting to know you, Tracy, episode. But I am very interested in the editing side, like your editing work that you do, and audio editing, and then more about just game stuff and then graphic design stuff. Like, I think there's so much more to talk about.
I would love that. I basically, like, my long-term goal, which I have gotten to, is to sort of make myself a Swiss Army knife of things that I can do, so that if someone needs a thing and I have the time, they can pay me to do that thing.
Sure.
And I have the luxury of working with projects that I believe in. So, yeah, I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff.
Great. Well, if people want to find you and your everything online, how could they do that?
You can find me anywhere at The Other Tracy. That is Tracy. That's my website, theothertracy.com. If you want to check out You Are the Dungeon, you can go to youarethedungeon.com. I did snag the domain for that, which is very cool. And I have more stuff coming up for my Iron Edda setting. I have a new Iron Edda game in the works that I'm playtesting right now. IronEdda.com is currently a placeholder, but there will be stuff there soon. I've got some behind-the-scenes stuff that I'm getting worked out, and once it's worked out, there'll be really cool news on that front. Ooh. So if you like Norse myth and mecha made of the bones of dead giants, then you'd like Iron Edda.
So metal. All right. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at RocketOrca, Kenny as at Volfmere, and John is at CrosswaysGM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.